Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. This week, I can't believe I got to talk to Betty Buckley. I've known her as an actress my entire life, from Eight is Enough, from the musical Cats, from the movie Carrie, to Supergirl, to her upcoming turn on season 3 of Preacher. She's an absolute American icon with her 18th studio album coming out, and we had a blast talking about everything from Steely Dan to Carrie the musical. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, Les.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for taking the time to do the interview today. I really appreciate it. You have an absolutely amazing career, and it's been so wonderful doing research for this, seeing where everyone I know knows you from.
Thanks. It's all different. Some people know me for this, and other people know me for that. It's funny.
Yeah, where I excitedly bring up The Happening or Split, and then somebody responds with, "Oh, no, 8 is enough." I'm like, well, yes, that.
That's funny.
So I had gotten a copy of your upcoming album, Hope.
Oh, you have a copy? Oh, great.
And is this your 17th solo album?
18th.
18th. There was one in between.
But that doesn't include cast albums and stuff. That's just, the albums I've done with my ensemble of musicians. So.
What went into selecting the tracks for this?
Well, I usually do a new show every year with my collaborator, Christian Jacob, and it takes us about 6 months to put it all together. We debuted this collection at Joe's Pub last fall, and then I call my record company and say, this sounds pretty decent to me, and they were like, yeah, let's make a record. So fortunately, they gave me a budget and let me do another live recording. The last one, Story Songs, was released last April, which was a 2 CD set of concert recordings. So this year, we're doing 4 concerts at Joe's Pub on the 5th, 6th, and 9th. One show at 7:30 p.m. on the 5th and 6th, and 2 shows on Saturday the 9th at 7:30 and 9 to celebrate the new album coming out. Basically, I call different composer that I love, lyricists, and say, do you have any new material? And Jason Robert Brown sent us the song Hope. That was his newest piece, and I was very moved by it. And then we picked other songs around that would, so that became kind of the centerpiece of the message of the record. And then there are a lot of other story songs, 3 from my friend T-Bone Burnett, and a song by Paul Simon that my brother suggested, and a song by Mary Chapin Carpenter that my assistant Kathy suggested, and a couple by Steely Dan, who's my favorite, fusion band. We revived a song, Falling in Love by Lisa Loeb, that I've recorded before, but it just felt timely to sing it again.
That was one that stuck out to me. It wasn't a Lisa Loeb track that I was familiar with, and I saw her name on the writing credit.
Oh, you didn't know that song?
No, so I wasn't familiar with that song. It's beautiful. And similarly...
yeah, it's a great song, great story.
A friend of mine just got me into... I feel so behind the times on Steely Dan, but a friend of mine got me into Steely Dan last year. And
oh, wow. Well, better late than never, I'll tell you.
Luckily, the albums still play the same, so it works.
Yeah. Don't you love Steely Dan?
Yes, yeah. I always wonder how to phrase that. They're not exactly a rock band. Fusion band is a fair enough way to put what they are.
They were very innovative of their time. No one was like them. It's jazz, but it's rock, but it's stories. It's incredible. They're amazing. So yeah, they kind of scored my life in all the years I was living in Hollywood, and would drive my little Beamer around playing their music for hours on end, and so I did a couple of their songs, and then a song by Joni Mitchell, who's my favorite, of course, and like that.
Something that I've noticed in your songs, there's an almost expressive acting quality I noticed like in tracks like Hope, where you slow down on lines and give them an almost. I assume this comes from a musical theater background and partly the writing, but there's an embodiment of character to me and a narrative to your songs that isn't always there on radio songs. And
thank you. Thanks.
Can you talk a bit about what goes into working out that character in songs? I feel like a lot of singer-songwriters probably just are writing songs as themselves and then performing them themselves. Is there something that goes into collaborating with folks and working up these songs?
Well, as an actress, singer, I'm a storyteller, and so each song, the way I pick material is if the situation of the song, the environment of the song, or what the character is going through, resonates with me on some level, or if it's a character that I feel that I understand what she or he is going through. That's what attracts me to the material. That there's a soul connection or a resonance, and I feel like I have something I can help. Well, I feel I have something specific to say within the material, and that it's something that I know about. It's harder when you don't know about it, and you have to do a lot more research. But the stuff that is on this album all felt, like T-Bone sent me like a dozen songs, and I picked 3. And, I have the vast Joni Mitchell repertoire, but I've always wanted to do the song Scarlet. I just feel like I know that girl. I know her very well. I've met her many times over in my early days in Hollywood, when I first was making films and television, and then she's walked through my classes for a number of years, various versions of her.
So you grew up in Big Spring, Texas.
No, I was born there. I grew up most primarily in Fort Worth.
Ah, okay.
My father was in the Air Force, and my mother actually wanted me to have a Texas citizenship, so she drove to Texas before I was born so that I could be born in Big Spring, which was her hometown.
Oh, that is a spectacularly Texan thing to do. That's great.
Isn't that funny? It's so funny. But I'm really grateful that she, made me a Texan, because my father was from South Dakota, and they were living in Brookings, South Dakota, where my dad was in university there and teaching and stuff, and or doing his graduate work or whatever. And he was also a cadet in the Air Force prior to that when she met him. And so he then joined her in Big Spring. But in the early days of my childhood, my father was in the Air Force, and so I started school in Morocco, North Africa, for a couple of years when I was 5 and 6, and then we moved back to Texas, and then we moved to Maine for my 4th grade year, and then we moved back to Texas. And he retired from the Air Force when I was in the 5th grade, and then we settled in Fort Worth, and I grew up here and went to elementary school. The majority of from 5th grade on, went to elementary school in Fort Worth, junior high, Monty Junior High School, Arlington Heights High School, and then TCU. I went to college. I really wanted to go off to Berkeley and be a part of the whole 60s music scene, and my father was like, no, you'll go to TCU and you will like it. So he was a very strict guy. Even though I was a child of the 60s, he was not having any of that. Made my brothers buzz cut their hair in the 60s like they were in the military or something. He was a very strange and, talented but very strict human being.
I feel like sometimes people watch folks on Broadway or watch people sing and think, oh, she has a beautiful voice, so that when you open your mouth, these beautiful things just happen. Has there been a bold choice or a particularly frightening choice that you've ever had to make for a character or something you had to commit to over your various roles? Yeah,
this new commitment to Hello Dolly is bold for me, and it's very daunting. It's not a part I ever particularly saw myself doing. And when I saw this new production on Broadway last winter with Bette Midler, I was just enchanted by it. I felt like such joy and this rapture about the musical theater and the beauty of the production. It was just extraordinary, and Bette Midler was just divine. And so we were young actresses together in New York at the same time. We had the same manager at one point, and he took me down to the baths to hear her, to see her act. And she was herself from the very beginning, and I was, on a different path with this manager, trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do and who I was as a performer. And so she was kind of this example that has always been, that I've always looked up to. And so it wouldn't have occurred to me to want to do that show after I saw her do it, because it was just perfect. She was absolutely perfect. And then when I got cast in Preacher, the AMC TV show in January, I was really thrilled because I'm a huge fan of that show, And so when this character of Madame Marie Langell, the grandmother to Jessie Custer, played by Dominique Cooper, came up, I was just, oh, God, this is great. And so I went to New Orleans, and the following week, to start shooting the season 3, and I've been there for 4 months. I just got home on Saturday. And my agent just called a week later and said, Scott Rudin, the producer of Hello, Dolly, called and offered you the national tour, which goes out in the fall. And I was like, are you kidding me? And he's like, no. He says he wants you to do it. And so they promptly flew me into New York that weekend to meet with Scott and Jerry Zaks, the wonderful director of the show. And I had a lovely meeting with them, and they seemed very confident that I could do this. So I decided I'll do it. But you're catching me at a moment where I'm like, the amount of work I have to do to get ready to do 8 shows a week for 44 weeks on the road all across America is daunting to me. So I'm just beginning that work now that we've wrapped Preacher, and I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be something. I think it'll be fun in the end, but as I face things before I begin them, I'm always kind of in awe and come up with all kinds of insecurities. But my brother Norman is a director in the television business, and he's very talented, very smart guy. He's always like, oh, Betty Lynn, you're always like this. Just do the work. You're going to be fine. So he always reminds me that I go through this being overwhelmed thing every time I start something new.
Yeah, I have friends and loved ones that do that for me as well. If man, you're nervous and don't want to go right before everything, right? So just go.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. And then somehow or another you take one step at a time, and, hopefully it all comes together.
Your role on Preacher, I had initially only seen it referred to as Grandma, and was wondering if they were trying to keep that secret. And I was happy to finally see her confirmed as Marie Langell. That's a villainous grandmother.
Yeah, she's something else. She's a Cajun sorceress, and she has a major skill set of spells and things she can do magically. And they call it, she's a spiritualist, and she's a scary gal. She for a price she can bring people back to life. But if people betray her or don't pay what they owe, and or don't, she's ruthless. I mean, really, really cruel and really evil. But it was super fun to play, I have to tell you. She is a complicated, person, and with a very interesting background that was shared with me by Sam Catlin, the writer, showrunner, and Michael Slovis, who's one of the producing directors, and and then there's the comics that as research material and stuff, or the graphic novels. But she's, we kept the essence of the graphic novels, certainly, but gave her more of a complicated human past that, you only witness little small details of. But I haven't seen what they've cut together yet. I've only seen the first 2 episodes. And she's a scary gal, but it was so much fun to play her.
I'm constantly amazed on that show how they depart from source material but still manage to feel right and get the characters right or land in the right spot even as they divert. So I'm really interested to see as they bring in Angelville and all of this what that looks like through the lens of the show.
Yeah, they're so talented, this group. the production team, the crew in New Orleans, all of the actors, everybody involved with the show is just so incredibly excellent at what they do, and are all major artists. And it was really, truly the best work experience I've ever had in terms of feeling just this familial connection with the group, and that we were all in. Everybody's so into the show and the style of it, and it's so much fun. It's really twisted, but it's super fun.
Can I ask who are you a fan of now, in terms of Broadway or television or acting? Are there young artists coming up that you're watching that particularly inspire you?
Well, I love Dominic Cooper and Ruth Nega and Joseph Gilgun. I love those guys. I really, really enjoyed working with them. They're really gifted actors and beautiful and, lovely people, really smart. And so, yeah, I love all of them.
I run a separate podcast that looks into one-season shows and critic darlings that just didn't get picked up. Has there been a favorite thing in your career that you loved doing that just didn't hit the way you thought it should have?
Well, I guess I could say Carrie, the musical Carrie, certainly was groundbreaking in the musical theater in that time period. Nobody had seen the kind of work that the mother-daughter sequences in that show that Lindsay Haley and I created with the writers Larry Cohen and Michael Gore and Dean Pitchford. And that music was operatic in proportion. The musical itself needed some tweaking, and the director was Terry Hans really didn't understand the Americana nature of the show, so it lacked a cohesive style. But our sequences were they were operatic in proportion and really passionately executed, and I'm really proud of that work. And had the producer push past the mixed reviews, they weren't all bad, but the mixed reviews, I think it would have been one of those kind of Rocky Horror Show phenomenons that people come to in costume, and because the audience literally would talk to us during the show as our character. It was hilarious. So it was that kind of. It was a kind of happening. You know what I mean? It was way more than a typical Broadway musical, which I think was why people were so conflicted about it, among other things. To be sure, there were things that were weak about it that needed to be changed, but that was an incredible experience.
And you had changed roles. You would play the gym teacher in the De Palma film of that, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Was it interesting to take a different role in the same story?
Oh yeah, it was really fun. Like I really loved what Piper Laurie did with the film, and was a huge fan of her work. Obviously, she's an icon, and I had previous to that been working on a character. I was the original witch in Into the Woods, and I was, my interpretation of that character relative to Rapunzel in the story of Into the Woods. I was playing that very authentically, very raw emotion as an abusive mother, and I couldn't come to terms with in our negotiation with the producers. So I elected not to go forward, and it was, we parted company. It was a mistake on my part. I should have just done it because it's, Into the Woods is a beautiful musical. But I had my pencil sketch of what was later to be Margaret White. I kind of began that process by playing this witch, this abusive mother. And so my portrait of Margaret White is this kind of, completely confused soul who's replaced all of her sexuality and passion with her spiritual conviction and her ruthlessness about it. Began with Into the Woods and then was fulfilled in Carrie. So, yeah, I played these kind of crazy people before. I'm referring to Madame Langelle as another one of these ladies.
course, you also were Grisabella in Cats, and so I easily half the people that I told about this interview knew you purely from Cats and the original cast of that. Have you had a particular part on stage that you remember thinking this outside of Carrie that this is particularly iconic? I'm setting the role for this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Grisabella, which was kind of I had done a lot of musical theater on Broadway before that in London, and then went off and did a one film, Carrie, and then the TV show Eight Is Enough for 4 years. But the whole time I was on Eight Is Enough, that was like a really difficult job for me. I was flying back to New York City for my voice lessons because my heart and soul, my passion is the musical theater. And so it was incredible to win that role, of Grisabella, because she's such a beautiful character, and the song is exquisite. So that was a huge blessing. And that same year, after Eight Is Enough was done, I got the film Tender Mercies, and got to work with Horton Foote and Robert Duvall and Bruce Beresford. And that character was that tormented alcoholic, country western star, Dixie Scott. And that was the first time I got my hands on a role that I'd really trained to play. When I was a young actor, I aspired to do really raw, authentic, emotionally truthful work, like Maureen Stapleton and Kim Stanley and Geraldine Page and later Jenna Rollins. They were my role models. I wanted to be that kind of actress, that really truth-telling actress. And then while I was in, the process of learning that technique of work, that psychological, emotionally truthful work, how to do it, just thinking about all that. I envisioned bringing that quality of work to the musical theater, because prior to that, except for certain actresses like Barbara Harris in, what were those shows she did? The Golden Apple and On a Clear Day, I think. She was a very truthful actress, singer. And so I had this vision for that. And then with Grisabella, I got a chance to bring that quality of work to the musical theater. And then the same year I did Dixie Scott, that film was released after we opened in Cats, but I had made the film the year previous. So it was kind of like Eight Is Enough was like a graduate school of big business, show business, and how to survive in the factory modus operandi of doing an old-time 29-episode a year for 4 years television show. Mm-hmm. And that was very difficult to do, but it taught me so much. So it was like getting my graduate degree, and then Dixie Scott in Tender Mercies and Grisabella and Cats were my master's thesis. I stepped out and said, okay, this is what I know how to do, and I was, rewarded for it, and that was really great. And so from that point, I felt like I really knew how to work. And then the next time I got to really apply that skill set was Sunset Boulevard. I'm trying to think, where was Carrie in that time? But Carrie was before Sunset, right? No, or after Sunset. I can't remember. Oh. I think that was in the 80s, and then Sunset was is 94 to 96. I did a year in London and a year on Broadway. I think that's the chronology. So,
Eight Is Enough always was an interesting story to me, just because the show had to write into the fictional plot line, real events, and recover from it with the loss of Diana Hyland. I'm sure it was a trying time. Was it strange to watch a show reconfigure in terms of being new into the Hollywood business?
Yeah, it was difficult because these kids, it was a huge hit, and they'd only shot 6 episodes, but it was a big hit, and they were America's darlings, And then the Dinah Hyland was a beautiful woman, and she was a woman in her 40s. And she was the girlfriend of John Travolta and had her own children. So she was a mother. She was all those things and a lovely human being. And then she got cancer and passed away, just shockingly. And then they auditioned everyone they could think of to come in as a stepmother figure. And Brandon Tartikoff, at that point, who later headed NBC, was the assistant to Fred Silverman, I think was his name, the head of ABC, which was our network. And Tartikoff had seen Carrie and thought Miss Collins, the character I played in Carrie, would be a perfect prototype for this traveling tutor who comes to help Willie Ames as Tommy when he's broken his leg. And then this relationship develops with Dick, and then she's married into the family. Dick as Tom Bradford. And if he hadn't persisted in his conviction that I was the lady, I wouldn't have gotten the role. And they flew me out twice, auditioned me twice. The first test apparently wasn't very good, and then the second one, they brought in their good director, Harry Harris, and which gave me a little more clarity on what to do. And so I got that part, but it sounded good at the time. They made me a lot of promises, and then as soon as I was kind of in the show, first of all, the group, the family, those kids really believed they were those characters. And there was no sense of we're actors doing a job, and I was 28 when I first got there, turning 29 years old, and I was just really passionate, young, ambitious actress who wanted to do good work, and they were like they didn't get me at all, and I didn't understand what I was entering into, and that I needed to be really careful of, keep a really low profile until I felt my way in, So it was very bumpy at the beginning. They were not happy. They'd lost their mother, so to speak. So it felt like being a real stepmother in a real family that had really lost their mother.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult, really difficult, for the first couple of years. I mean, I couldn't understand up front that they didn't understand that this was play acting, do you know what I mean? And that I was an actress who was there to serve them, to keep the show afloat. So it was really awkward, very awkward. And it took about 2 years for that transition to become kind of smoother. And also Lorimar Productions was were a young production company headed by Lee Rich, who was a very ruthless guy, and Merv Adelson, who was apparently connected with the mob. And they loved to intimidate you, actors, by saying, we're owned by the mafia and stuff. And it was just like, oh, what does that mean? And it was all about psychological intimidation to just get you to, I don't know, it was gross. And I was this girl from Texas, and I'd done one film and a lot of musical theater. And in musical theater, everything is like, I don't know, it's a much different experience. So I ended up having to hire a big gun attorney to protect me from these guys. And it was not fun, it wasn't pleasant. And then after about 2 years, they, as a production entity, got better, and like certain job positions that were originally there, people through nepotism who didn't know what they were doing, the team got better and the scripts got better, and then everybody started to relax more and accept one another better. So the last 2 years were quite pleasant, but the first 2 years I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? So
I was really struck listening to your new album, the centerpiece song, Jason Robert Brown's Hope. Mm-hmm. I love the lyrics in it of, it's entirely a song about stepping up and being present and being optimistic in spite of not feeling like that.
Right.
Years later, and with the world still crazy, What do you look to when you get up in the morning to put your shoulder to the wheel and stay optimistic about it?
Well, 15 years ago, the year following 9/11, after 9/11, I was lost, and as I think so many people all over the world felt that, the shock of that. I have no words.
Mm.
Several of my artist, musician friends did the same thing I did and moved back home, so to speak. So I put my lovely New York co-op that I thought I would live on the 108th and Riverside Drive. I thought I would live there for the rest of my life. This beautiful view of the river on the west side, and it was a beautiful apartment, and I loved it. And I just, I became obsessed a couple of months after 9/11 with finding a cutting horse, because that was my childhood dream, was to be successful in show business so that I could ride cutting horses and have a ranch. And cutting horses is a sport. It's like a beautiful equine sport based on the tradition of the Old West, and it's a classic sport, and it's the only equine sport where the horse has to literally think for himself, and the horse and rider's relationship is very intricate, like a dance team. And I've loved the sport and the beauty of it and the horses since I was like 12, and I grew up with. I had my first horse when I was 10, and I grew up with horses, and it was just a really important part of my life. And I kind of woke up 2 months after 9/11, was like, I got to get my cutting horse. I just forgot to do that. I need to do that. And so I became obsessed with finding that horse, and in the process connected with one of the top trainers in the cutting horse world, and he took me on as a student, and I was 55. So it was kind of an awkward moment to learn a whole new sport, but he felt I could do it because I'd ridden, as a child and stuff. So I went through this process of finding this horse and commuting from New York back to Texas, in North Texas, where he lived. This trainer's name was Bill Freeman. He's since passed away, but he was a real old-time cowboy, and like the top, he'd won more money in the sport of cutting than anybody at that point. He was a wonderful trainer and teacher. And so I started, working with him, and then he found me this incredible horse named Purple Badger, who was a champion cutting horse. And he was really young. He was like 5 years old. And when I bought him, he was just turning 6. And it was unusual for him to recommend a horse that young for a rider like me, because I was just a beginner in the sport. It's not easy to do it, So, but the horse was brilliant, and he was like, I would give him the wrong cue, and he'd do the right thing, And it just changed my life, and I started traveling with this trainer and his wife to all these horse shows, my assistant and I, and showing my horse, and I started winning money because the horse was so good, and I was kind of, still learning. And this horse was more than a horse to me. He was my first cutting horse. He was my teacher. He was like a soulmate. I'm not kidding. I had the most incredible relationship with that horse that I have ever had with any creature of any species on the planet. And I was like, one day I was coming home from teaching in New York, and I thought, you know what? I need to live where my horse lives. This is like too remarkable. I have to do this. The next day I put my apartment on the market, and within short order found this beautiful ranch in Texas, and moved to Texas 15 years ago this past Thanksgiving, and brought my horse to the ranch, and I used to ride him around, and I built the barn and, fencing and an arena to practice in and stuff. And I used to ride him around the ranch and say, never was a horse so well loved. Look at this place I bought just for you. And I had 3 perfect years with that divine being. And then he shockingly passed away with a brain aneurysm one day just running in the pasture. It was a horrible loss to me. But the 3 years prior were the 3 most perfect years of my life. And what this ranch is this, it's like, I don't know, it's a respite, it's a it's a gift, this beautiful place that I live with trees and, animals. And my assistant who's worked with me for 18 years, she lives in the guest house, and together we rescue animals. So it's been an incredible counterbalance and a place of peace for me from everything that goes on in the world, from everything that I do for a livelihood, traveling, doing concert work, doing film and television and theater. And it's going to be hard to go away for a year, for Dolly, except that we have this 3-week break in the middle of the tour. So this place is my, my saving grace, if you will.
No, that sounds absolutely wonderful. I grew up in Northeast Texas and live in Central Texas now. And
where do you live?
I live in Austin, but we also have a property outside of Spicewood, so 45 minutes or so.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. You're very suddenly kind of in the middle of nowhere on a dead-end road. It's great. Yeah,
it's just beautiful here. And, I was in New Orleans for 4 months. I got to come home in the middle for about a week. I also was in, Vancouver twice to shoot episodes of Supergirl, and I came back through Texas. And so but I haven't ridden my horses for 4 months. I'm going to go ride them as soon as we get off the phone. And but it was just like, they were happy to see me when I came back Saturday. They were like, if you can notice, of course, a smile, but I felt like they were really smiling and giving me all kinds of nuzzles and kisses and stuff. And I think they finally get the concept that when I go away for long times, it's because I'm, earning the money to pay for their grain and hay. I think I've finally made them understand that.
You're not vanishing and abandoning them. Yeah.
Yeah, but I go away for long periods of time, and I used to be, actually, every time I've ever come home until this Saturday, they've always turned their back on me, like, where have you been, And, but this Saturday, they were very welcoming, so I was really happy and relieved about that. But anyway, this place is my salvation, and I marvel at the fact that it took me so long to get around to doing it, because this was always my dream, to live in the country with animals and horses and to have that quality of peace. But when I got back Saturday night, after working so hard on Preacher, I was just like exhausted. So basically I slept for 2 days, and now I'm just kind of coming back to life today.
Yeah, I think there was something about finding an appreciation for a small town on my terms and not feeling stuck there.
Yeah.
I think my mom is still astonished that I enjoy being in the middle of a small town.
Yeah,
still.
The only thing about Texas, though, you have to admit, is the heat. Although these days the heat everywhere is kind of not so cool.
Well, I won't keep you from your horses any longer. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Les. It's nice talking to you.
I can't wait to see you do your turn on Preacher, and best of luck on your tour for Dolly. I'm sure you're going to do absolutely great.
Thank you. Let me know what you think of Preacher. I can't wait to see what my friends and people, acquaintances in the business and stuff have to say about it. I'm like, I wonder what they'll think, because it's really a crazy character.
We'll have to check back in to see if you got any weird responses from friends and family.
Yeah. Thanks, Les.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast and a member of the Electric Sweater Podcast Network. We are exclusively listener-supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/TVDudes. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter @TV Dudes. All the music for our show is by our friend and original TV Dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith. To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com and electricsweater.com. I'm Grant Davis. Thanks for listening.